Unfortunately, his African servant decided that the only safe place to stand was right behind him. This distracted him for a moment, and one of the Somali warriors struck him with a spear which went straight through his left cheek and out through the other. Even with a spear stuck through his face, Burton fought on, and eventually he and Hearn managed to get clear and run down to their boats. Pulling out the spear, Burton wrapped a bandage around his head. There was no sign of Stroyan or Speke, so they went back to look for them. They managed to find Speke, who was badly wounded, and carried him back to their boat. Stroyan was dead, riddled with wounds. The next day they buried him at sea. When Burton returned to England, he had a very impressive scar on his face, but nothing much else to show for his efforts. There was some disappointment at the failure of his expedition, but most people were more interested in the war that Britain was fighting in the Crimea. While Burton was in Africa, the famous charge of the Light Brigade had taken place. He immediately set sail for the Crimea, where he joined a troop of cavalry, but he was too late and saw little action. When the war was over, he returned to London and persuaded the Royal Geographical Society to send him back to Africa to try again. Accompanied by Speke and a party of African porters, he set off from the island of Zanzibar into the interior of Africa. Both Englishmen caught tropical diseases. Speke nearly went blind, and Burton's legs swelled up so badly that he could hardly stand. Neither man could walk unaided, but they soldiered on until, after nearly 640 kilometres or 400 miles trekking across wild country, they reached a huge lake, which they hoped might be their goal. This was Lake Tanganyika. Burton was sure that they had accomplished their mission. He was still very sick, so he rested there. Speke, who'd recovered from his illness, decided to travel a bit further north. He stumbled across an even greater lake, which he called Lake Victoria. He was sure that this was the true source of the Nile. When they returned to London, Speke claimed that he had been the expedition's leader, and that he alone had discovered the source of the Nile. When he arrived home 2 weeks later, Burton was furious. But what could he do? The papers were full of the sensational story, and Speke was the hero of the hour. The Society declared that they'd send Speke back to Africa to make a thorough survey of his great discovery. While Speke returned to Africa, Burton decided to recover his health with a trip to the American West. Only Burton could describe a journey across the Wild West as a rest cure. He went by steamer across the Atlantic and then travelled west by wagon across the great American plains. Arriving at Salt Lake City, he met the founder, the Mormon leader, Brigham Young. On the way back, he had his hair cut short, joking that this made him a less attractive victim for a scalping. It may have been a joke, but there were many American Indian war parties on the prairies. On one occasion, Burton missed a fight by only a few hours, arriving at a coaching station to find a smouldering ruin with all the inhabitants killed and scalped. Returning to England, he wrote a book about his American adventure, and at last he married Isabel Arundel. Unfortunately, the army of the East India Company had been disbanded, so he no longer had a job. His book was not a success, and things were looking pretty desperate. Fortunately, Isabel had some family connections in the British Foreign Office, and she managed to persuade them to offer Richard the job of British consul to the tiny island of Fernando Po on the coast of West Africa. Actually, this was the worst job they could possibly offer him. Fernando Po was particularly unhealthy. The year before, nearly a third of the Europeans who lived there had died of tropical diseases. Burton refused to let Isabel go with him, saying it was too dangerous. He spent hardly any time on the island. His authority extended to the coast of Biafra, and since the geography was a bit hazy in those days, Burton took that to include most of the coast of Nigeria and the Cameroon.